Hello, dear polymer clay enthusiast. I'm Michaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and in today's tutorial, I want to inspire you to make a different kind of mosaics. I'm talking about an eggshell mosaics because this is something that you would throw away, but not anymore because now you have an idea on how to use these eggshells with inks and beautifully decorate your polymer clay pieces. Let me show you how I prepare the eggshells for the eggshell mosaic. So after breaking up an egg, and I intend to use the contents, of course, I will put these eggshells under running water. It's better to use them to clean them under running water, and I will take the time and remove the and rub off and peel off the interior membrane that you'll find inside the egg. So for this project I'm going to use again black polymer clay because I like having a contrast in my pieces. So I have prepared a layer of polymer clay, and I passed it through the setting number 2 of my Atlas pasta machine, but because of the fact that we are going to use a texture to texture the back of the piece, I think I would, if I would have to do this project again, I would prefer the largest setting of my pasta machine. Then I just used a beautiful leafy texture stamp, and I used it to impress a beautiful texture onto the clay, and I used my hands to press it into the clay, but there is a risk of ending up with an wavy piece of polymer clay, so it's better to use a roller or an acrylic block and evenly press the texture into the polymer clay. But I have to tell you that I like pressing the stamps into the polymer clay, but of course I am very careful not to overdo it in some areas. Um, and then I decided to use as a template a plastic bottle cover. This is the plastic cover that you will find in France for shampoo or makeup remover, and this is a shape that I particularly like. While for my trial piece, I have just used the flexible blade and I cut out the template. For this piece I wanted to work with with this kind of template. Um, then I am going to use a textured element, and in fact I've ended up with this textured sheet of polymer clay by putting the clay passed on the setting number 2 on top of the same leafy texture plate, and I put them both through the largest setting of my pasta machine. And so I cut out this textured element and I decide where I'm going to place it on top of the clay. So I want to have a piece with a part which is slightly embossed and textured, and the other part, and this is going to be 1/3 of the piece, let's say, and for the rest of the pendant I am going to use eggshells and color them with inks. So after placing the textured element on top of the clay, I use the blade to remove the excess, and of course you'll need to use parchment paper, baking paper, to gently press this textured element into the base. And then I'm just going to fill up the area with larger or smaller eggshell eggshells. And when I'm applying a larger eggshell, I'm gently pressing on in the middle of the eggshell, and it will break up into smaller pieces. But I'm not applying too much pressure because I don't want to have a wavy polymer clay underneath, of course. Um, and in fact, there are several ways that you can go about coloring the eggshell. When I use the eggshell for polymer clay and I have to press it into the base and I'm not gluing it with liquid clay, um, I um, I start with this idea. I'm putting the pieces on top of the clay, I'm pressing them gently into the clay, and then I'm applying pressure on the larger pieces, and they break up into smaller pieces. But you have a second way to go about this. You could color these pieces with ink, let the ink dry, and you could apply several colors on one piece, and let the colors mix together. Let the inks dry, use gloves, and then when you apply these colored pieces on the clay and press them gently into the clay, they will split up into tiny pieces. So you can start with this mosaic as a blank canvas, or you could start by coloring the pieces and then pressing them into the clay. Next, I am going to use an acrylic paint marker, a black acrylic paint marker, and I'm just going to doodle a spiraling design on top of the piece. And then I'm going to use um, red chili piñata alcohol ink and sunbright piñata alcohol ink. And as you can see, the eggshells are very permeable, and the ink will um, travel on top of the piece beautifully. And then I applied a little bit of drops of teal alcohol ink on the sides, and I didn't want my piece to be too dark, so I tried to apply small quantities of ink, and I try to work with light colors, and I recommend you to be very careful with the amount of inks that you are applying, because the more you apply, the more you risk having drippings of ink on the back of the piece. And if this happens, sometimes it happens to me too, you should use baby wipes and rubbing alcohol and clean the back of the piece. Um, of course, you'll have to let the inks dry, and then I put the pieces in the oven for 45 minutes, and I bake them under an aluminum disposable pan to protect them from direct heat. I bake them on parchment paper, and then I let the clay cool down, and I decided to finish the pieces by applying a thin layer of UV resin, and I used a brush to do so. And I'm applying this thin resin for the beautiful glass-like effect of the pieces with resin on top. I'm also applying resin because resin will protect these pieces that were not glued to the clay. So if I didn't want to use resin for other projects, uh, when I'm not using resin on top to protect the pieces, I have to put a thin layer of liquid clay on the base, and then press gently these eggshells. And when baking the clay, this will get trapped into the liquid clay. I forgot to use the heat gun to remove air bubbles, but it is a very good idea to use a heat gun because you will have air bubbles because of the spaces in between the small pieces of eggshells. And then I put the pieces under my nail art UV lamp, and I cure them for 7 minutes. And these are the finished pieces, and I hope that you like this idea, and I hope that you will give it a try with in your work with polymer clay. Thank you, and stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay.